Last episode, Ukraine had its greatest century, and its most devastating one. The Cossack Revolution, the Hetmanate, the first Ukrainian state, and then Pereyaslav, the decision that opened a door Ukraine couldn't close. The 1700s open with that door swinging wide open. Russia is no longer a distant protector. It is becoming something else entirely. And Ukraine is directly in its path. Welcome to Episode 3, the 1700s, the century where Russia stops pretending and Ukraine learns what Imperial absorption actually looks like. We left off at Poltava, 1709. Peter the Great had just crushed the Swedish Cossack alliance. Hetman Mazeppa was dead in exile, and Peter was ready to make sure nothing like Mazeppa ever happened again. Peter's first move was symbolic and devastating. He ordered the complete destruction of the Zaporozhian Sich, the island fortress that had stood as the heart of Cossack freedom for nearly 2 centuries, burned to the ground in a matter of days. Peter then issued the resolutions of 1709, systematically stripping away what remained of Hetmanate autonomy. Russian officers were placed alongside Ukrainian administrators. Every significant decision now required Moscow's approval. To understand what was happening to Ukraine, you need to understand what Peter the Great was building. He wasn't just expanding Russia, he was reinventing it as a modern European empire with a capital, a navy, an academy of sciences, and absolutely no room for autonomous regions. St. Petersburg, built on swamps at enormous human cost, was Peter's statement to the world. Russia was no longer an eastern backwater. It was a European power, and European powers, in Peter's understanding, did not tolerate internal autonomy. Ukraine's Hetmanate, with its elected leadership, its own laws, its distinct Orthodox culture, was exactly the kind of autonomous anomaly that Peter's centralized imperial vision could not tolerate. Peter died in 1725, but the dismantlement of Ukrainian autonomy continued under his successors with patient, systematic thoroughness. Each decade brought new restrictions. Each new czar found new ways to tighten the grip. In 1722, Peter created the Little Russian Collegium, a Russian administrative body placed directly over the Hetmanate. The word Little Russian itself was deliberate. Ukraine wasn't a distinct nation. It was Little Russia, a province, a region, a subordinate. Between 1727 and 1750, there were brief periods of restored Hetman authority. Russia needed Ukrainian Cossack military support for its own wars. But each restoration came with new conditions, new oversight, new strings attached. Then came Catherine the Great, and patient dismantlement became something faster and far more final. Catherine abolished the Hetmanate entirely in 1764. No more elected hetman, no more Cossack self-governance. Ukraine was reorganized into standard Russian gubernias, provinces identical in structure to any other part of the empire. And then, in 1775, Catherine destroyed what Peter had left standing. Russian troops surrounded the new Sich, the rebuilt Zaporozhian fortress, and dismantled it. The Cossack host was formally disbanded. 3 centuries of Cossack institutional history ended by imperial decree. While Russia was absorbing eastern Ukraine, Western Ukraine was experiencing its own seismic shift. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which had ruled Western Ukraine for centuries, was collapsing. In 3 partitions, 1772, 1793, and 1795, Russia, Prussia, and Austria divided Poland among themselves and erased it from the map entirely. Poland ceased to exist as a state for 123 years. And Western Ukraine, Galicia, passed to the Habsburg Austrian Empire. This created a situation that would define Ukrainian politics for the next 2 centuries. Western Ukraine under Habsburg Austria, Eastern Ukraine under Romanov Russia. 2 different empires, 2 different systems, two different experiences of what it meant to be Ukrainian. Eastern Ukraine under Russian rule wasn't passive. The 1700s saw repeated popular uprisings, the Haidamaka movements, peasant and Cossack rebellions against Polish landlords in right bank Ukraine that Russian-controlled left bank watched with complicated feelings. The largest, the Collegium of 1768, was a massive uprising in right bank Ukraine that resulted in enormous violence against Polish nobility and Jewish communities, ultimately suppressed by joint Russian-Polish military action. While empires dismantled Ukrainian political institutions, something they couldn't easily reach was flourishing underground: Ukrainian cultural and intellectual life. The Kiev Mohyla Academy, founded in 1632, continued operating throughout the 1700s as a center of Orthodox scholarship and Ukrainian intellectual life, producing theologians, philosophers, and writers who maintained Ukrainian cultural continuity. The most remarkable intellectual figure of the century was Hryhorij Skovoroda, philosopher, poet, wandering teacher. He wrote in Ukrainian and Latin, refused prestigious positions, and walked the step teaching anyone who would listen. Skovoroda's philosophy centered on inner freedom, the idea that no empire could own what was inside a person's mind and heart. In a century of imperial absorption, it was a quietly revolutionary message. By mid-century, Ukrainian Cossack officers had an uncomfortable choice: resist and be crushed, or integrate into the Russian imperial system and preserve what they could of their status. Many did integrate, and Ukrainian officers served with distinction in Russian armies across Europe, from the 7 Years' War to the Russo-Turkish Wars. Their military excellence was real. Their cultural erasure, in exchange, was also real. The Russo-Turkish Wars of the 1700s had a specific Ukrainian dimension. They were fought largely on and around Ukrainian territory, and their outcome determined who would control the Black Sea coast that Cossacks had raided for generations. Catherine the Great wasn't just a military expansionist. She was a cultural engineer, and her vision of empire had no place for a distinct Ukrainian identity. Ukrainian language education was suppressed. The distinct Ukrainian Orthodox Church traditions were brought under tighter Russian Orthodox control. Ukrainian nobles were encouraged, pressured, to Russify. The process was gradual, systematic, and deliberate. The policy had a name that Ukrainians would remember bitterly for centuries: Malorossia, Little Russia. The official position was that Ukrainians were not a separate people. They were simply Russians who had developed some regional quirks. Here is the great paradox of the 1700s for Ukraine. It was the century of maximum imperial pressure, and the century when Ukrainian cultural identity became most self-conscious and most deliberately preserved. The Cossack political institutions were gone, but the memory of them was being carefully recorded, preserved, and mythologized. The Cossack chronicle tradition, historical writings celebrating Cossack culture, flourished precisely because the living reality was being destroyed. Next episode, the 1800s. The imperial pressure reaches its peak. Russia bans the Ukrainian language entirely, not once, but twice. The Eames Decree of 1876 prohibits publishing, teaching, or even importing books in Ukrainian. But something unexpected happens in response. A poet is born in a serf family. A man who will become Ukraine's Shakespeare, Ukraine's national symbol, Ukraine's answer to empire. His name is Taras Shevchenko. The 1800s, the century where they tried to kill the Ukrainian language with laws, and Ukraine answered with poetry. Episode 4, coming next.